Greetings, everyone. Welcome to WCC TV. This is the African Esquire Show, and I'm your host, Tierney Cherie. Trying something new this week. I'm going to see if I can live record these videos instead of trying to edit them, because the editing software I used just completely deleted my last video. I completely finished this video, was ready to upload it, and it deleted it. So we're going to try to see how this works out. And if this works out good, then this will probably be how we do it, but not much should change on your end. Information is still going to be the same. So first story that we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about Macky Sall from the AU. If you don't know who that is the current chairperson of the African Union, also the president of Senegal. Now, he had raised some issues about Zimbabwe that is very important. I'm sure if you are aware of anything happening in Africa, you have to also be aware that Zimbabwe is still undergoing sanctions, Western sanctions, targeted sanctions that affect everyone. And the sanctions are unjust, they're illegal, and yet Western countries, specifically the United States, have continued to target this African country. So let's read from this story. It says that the AU chairperson calls for the lifting of Western sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe. Macky Sall reiterated the African Union's call for the lifting of Western sanctions that have targeted Zimbabwe for more than 20 years. He was delivering a speech in Malabo on Friday during the AU's humanitarian summit. The UN Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights found earlier this year that Western sanctions have exacerbated Zimbabwe's economic and humanitarian crisis. 2 African Union extraordinary summits kicked off in Malabo Friday. This is after the Equatorial Guinea President Teodoro Obiang addressed the opening session. Then the Senegalese president, serving as AU's chairperson, delivered a speech. Now I'm going to read a quote from the speech. He says, "Bearing in mind the repeated quest of the African Union, I solemnly call for the lifting of foreign sanctions that have been imposed for years on our brothers and sisters in Zimbabwe. In these times of deep crisis, these sanctions further worsen the living conditions of the people of Zimbabwe." Of course, they don't care. This is why they put the sanctions in place in the first place. The West basically gets to point at Zimbabwe and say, hey, these people decided that they wanted to take their land back from Western colonists. And that's essentially what happened. They wanted to take their land back from the Western colonists. And because the West couldn't allow that to be a precedent for all African people, they said, okay, we're going to hit you so hard economically that your economy is going to suffer and your people will suffer. And rather than pointing at our sanctions as a cause of your suffering, we're going to say that it's because you took your land back and because your land reform was this and that. And that's really been a talking point from a lot of people about Zimbabwe. So, for example, whenever you hear people from South Africa or Namibia or other African countries talking about land reform, meaning we were colonized, these people took our land and we want our land back. Excuse me, I'll still get over this cold. If y'all remember, I had a cold on the last podcast. But whenever they're having these conversations, what's said about land reform is that, well, we don't want what's happened to Zimbabwe to happen to us, completely ignoring the sanctions, the Western backlash against Zimbabwe. That is really the nexus of these issues. So that's the number one reason. The other reason why they want to do this is because they want to make sure that Zimbabwe doesn't succeed, because Zimbabwe did something that could go a long way for other African countries. So they not only want to point at Zimbabwe as a bad example, but they don't want them to actually succeed. A lot of other countries, it's the same fear of succeeding at types of anti-colonial movements as far as policy. And then, of course, they also just want to punish Zimbabwe. How dare you, Africans, say that you want your land back? How dare you go beyond what we're willing to do? How dare you take measures into your own hands? And so all of this plays into the hands of the West, who has decided to continue to target Zimbabwe. And really, we have to continue to amplify Zimbabwe's struggle for that very reason. Zimbabwe's struggle really is Africa's struggle. Any African country that wants to also obtain real sovereignty, they're going to face the same type of targeting that Zimbabwe has suffered. And because of that, we can't allow for the West to distract us, with other issues. Some people get distracted by this monkeypox thing, or distracted by different diseases that come out. They forget that Zimbabwe is still facing Western sanctions. So we're going to continue to amplify that struggle. So let's go to the same story, or the next story. The next story that I want to talk about, this is a reminder really about what is happening in the Horn of Africa. And I just want all of us to remember, it's just not the Horn of Africa. It's really going to be the entire African continent that's going to suffer, not just from COVID, remember, but also from other types of famines just caused by the Ukraine crisis. Globalization has had double bad effects on Africa because because of globalization, a lot of countries depend on imports from these countries. And if these countries can't import it, same things that we could easily grow in Africa, well, now we don't have access to them, and many people will starve. The other issue is that when it comes to a humanitarian organization saying they're going to provide food aid, when you're continually expecting that aid, but now that aid is being given to Ukraine or Ukrainians because they're priority number one, you're priority number 100. That's another thing that's going to really come back and hurt you. So just reading from this story, famine worsens in the Horn of Africa. The risk of famine in Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia keeps getting worse with the prospects of another bad rainy season. This is the 5th in a row. Somalia and parts of Kenya and Ethiopia have been hit by weather phenomenon unseen for at least 40 years, a succession of 4 rainy seasons with low rainfall, said in a statement issued by UN agencies and other partners involved in humanitarian action. According to their statement, the drought has already led to the death of 3.6 million heads of livestock in Kenya and Ethiopia, in areas where livestock farming is the main source of income for local populations. The situation is no different in Somalia, where a third of the livestock have died in Somalia since mid-2021. More than 16.7 million people in the 3 countries are already acutely food insecure, a figure that could rise to 20 million by September, and even more if another unsatisfactory rain season occurs in the 4th quarter, the signatories note. And the article says, obviously, the situation has gotten worse due to the war in Ukraine, which has caused food and fuel prices to soar. So we're really being put inside of a really, really desperate situation as African people. And I just want to remind everyone that the call to organize is never too late. It's never too late, whether you want to support people in the Horn of Africa, support the infrastructure that has to happen, whether you're someone that's like, I want to go back to the continent and not just go back and be a leech or not go back and be a leech, but I want to go back and actually help the people who have been taken advantage of the system. The call for organization is always outstanding. So not just sharing information, but thinking about what you can do as a person, or rather connecting with people who are already doing something to promote food security. Food sovereignty is really what we need. Globalization has dealt us a horrible, serious blow. It has put us in this position where we're so vulnerable to climate. We're so vulnerable to conflicts. Obviously these countries are also ones that are being affected by war. We're so vulnerable in so many ways that we're not ready and prepared to feed even the most vulnerable people. And so there's so many ways that you can be involved, and I encourage you all to do so. So let's go to another story. We're actually going to turn to the United States of America, that place where I am based. So let's talk about the NFAC leader, Grandmaster Jay. I think this is an unfortunate story. I know that people have mixed feelings about him. I just want to emphasize about him, number one, that we should remember people don't get sentenced for federal crimes. They don't go to jail whenever they are not a threat to the system, when their only crime is really political organization. So let's just talk about what happened recently with Grandmaster Jay. Black militia leader Grandmaster Jay, he was found guilty on federal charges in Louisville protests. And again, I know some of y'all don't like him. I was really hoping he beat these charges because it was just clear political charges, political what's the word? It's politically motivated. They seen this black man who was organizing all these black people to have guns and march inside of a formation. Many people were becoming drawn to it. I even remember seeing people in Africa talking about this. And you can imagine just the fear for Western colonists when you have people in Africa talking about, oh, look at these African Americans who are picking up guns and marching right, to these centers of white supremacy. You can imagine just how scared this had a lot of the West, and why he had to be taken out. So we know it's politically motivated. We know it's, unjust. His whole accusation was that he was holding a rifle. There were some federal agents on a building. They said he pointed the rifle at them. Remember, they did not arrest him on the scene. I think they actually arrested him months later. So that lets you know that they thought about these charges and trumped them up. And now essentially he is found guilty, unfortunately. So John F.J., he's the leader of the NFAC, better known as Grandmaster J. He was charged with assaulting a federal task force officer and brandishing a firearm in relation to a crime of violence. According to court documents and evidence presented at trial on September 4th, he forcibly assaulted, resisted, opposed, impeded, all of this, intimidated, interfered with a federally deputized task force officer who was performing official duties when Johnson aimed a rifle at him. I want to read that again. I'm sorry. Forcibly assaulted, resisted, opposed, impeded, intimidated, interfered with a federal deputized task officer who was performing official duties. And yet he was not arrested on the scene. He was arrested months later. Okay. Prosecutors say he pointed a rifle at two deputized task force officers positioned on a roof near Jefferson Square Park. Both are detectives with the Louisville Metro Police, the same people who murdered Breonna Taylor. Based on the 2 counts of the conviction, Johnson faces a penalty of not less than 7 years in prison. Johnson is to be sentenced on August 22nd. This is serious. Even if you're someone who does not care for NFAC, if you felt like they were controlled opposition, I've heard things like that. I've heard people say that they were basically fake and, they weren't really an activist movement. I've heard different things, that they were just reckless, so many criticisms against them. I don't like everything that they did either. Let's be clear about that. But if you are someone who sees what's happening right now with Buffalo, and you see that as a warning shot that these white supremacists are ready to go to war with us, innocent people, go to war with us and take innocent lives. If you take that as a warning shot, and I'm very sure had they been active when that happened, after Buffalo, you would have seen a lot of them marching up to Buffalo, to show solidarity with what happened there, that massacre. So when you have these things happening, and more, you see these people coming out of the woodworks that just want to kill Africans just to say I did it and have their name be known all over TV and all that stuff and be famous or something like that. And a lot of people are like, well, we need to arm ourselves. Just understand organizational wise. These are some lessons I think we can learn from what happened with Grandmaster Jay. And understand, I think he's done. He's 59 right now. They're saying 7 years. He would be 66 or 67, and I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be able to have a registered weapon anyways as a federal offender, assuming that these charges do stay pinned to him. And it looks like they are because they already charged him, or not charged him. They found him guilty. The thing that we should learn is that our organizational structures cannot be focused on individuals. When Grandmaster Jay was taken out, there should have been 3 other people who had already been working the streets, had already been doing things, people who could step in and continue the movement without him. We cannot let our movements, not let our organizational structures, whether it's a militia or whether it's a political organization, become about one person. Because when that person is no longer there, and if that person's a threat, it's a safe bet that they might not be there. Let's just look at probability. If that person's really a threat, they're targeted. There's a target on them, so they're going to go after that person. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is that when he went out, when he got arrested, you would think that his people and give me some information if I'm wrong about this, but there should have been like a real rallying cry. Like, listen, this man is a political prisoner, basically being incarcerated for organizing, regardless of what you think. If you feel like African people should have the right to arm themselves and organize, there should have been protest about this. I didn't see any protests. And that also goes back to the organizational structure that was inherently not there. And that's what we have to be prepared for. If you are a leader and you basically take the fall for your movement, is there going to be a protest? Is there going to be not just a protest, an active, campaign to make sure that this person gets fees, and not just fees, but press? I didn't hear any press about this. These are just things I picked up on. Like, okay, this man basically got arrested and he went on house arrest. And then I didn't hear anything else about him. That's the type of stuff organizationally that you want to be prepared for. Understand that people in leadership are going to be targeted, and that you want to have a response, because when there's no response, this lets the feds know that they could just pick off your organization like that. In fact, I've heard of a number of people in the NFAC who, I've heard of different people basically facing similar types of things from the feds. And so you got these people being picked off one by one. No one really knows about it. That's another issue. So with our people, when it comes to, organizing in this type of fashion, understand probably the most dangerous thing that you can do as an African American is organized self-defense, organized armed self-defense, organized in that type of way. And so the other thing that I would just really recommend is that we study before we even touch a gun. We study the Black Panthers, study Robert Williams, and the NAACP, study Deacons of Defense. Just study the people who have already done these things, because there's a lot of ways that we can learn that these people dealt with the feds. And this was so predictable that it's almost like disappointing how little organization was created around the issue of being targeted. Like little work was done on that. And if you're going to be inside of a militia, organize for that and understand that this is not going to be something that they're going to let you do because you have a Second Amendment right. Understand that they're going to target you. Understand COINTELPRO is worse today, far worse today than it was when when our freedom fighters were dealing with it. And probably the worst part of it today is that it's so easy to target people because so many people put things on the internet for everyone to know. So these are things that we want to prepare for. And this is especially for those who want to stay in America. Some of us talk about repatriation like me, but others of us really are like, no, I want to stay here. Listen, if you want to stay here, we got to talk about protection, because of the next story I'm going to cover, you will know that these cops are not going to protect us. This federal government is not going to protect us. In fact, let's just go right into that next story, because I anytime I see something happening in the federal sphere, I always know it's a joke when they're trying to tell us that something revolutionary has happened done inside of the Oval Office. So we're going to talk about Biden's executive order. Okay, so I want you to look at this picture. You see Biden, you see George Floyd's daughter, who once again is being used, an 8-year-old. Now she's 8 years old, being used for photo ops. A lot of other police brutality families, police murder, people who were murdered by police, they were also used in a similar fashion. So let's talk about this. All right, Biden, how Biden's cops and advocates forged a deal on police and race. Jim Pasco, the executive director for the Fraternal Order of Police, was watching football on a Sunday afternoon when he got a call from Susan Rice, the top domestic policy advisor at the White House. Negotiations over an executive order to address racism and policing were in danger of breaking down after a draft leaked that law enforcement groups believe was too harsh towards police. Now, this kind of lets you know that these things that leak are leaked intentionally, honestly. Now, Rice was looking to get things back on track. She said they wanted to start over. Pasco said as he looked back on the day earlier this year They wanted to deal with us in total confidence. Now, he agreed. The result was the executive order that President Joe Biden signed last week during a ceremony that improbably brought together law enforcement leaders, civil rights activists, they're always ready to be in front of in the White House, and families of people who had been killed by the police. They said no one believes that American policing needs to be overhauled, including the president himself. They think that the order does not go far enough. And of course, when I said that they brought together law enforcement, civil rights activists, families who have people murdered by the police as their family members, why would you even show up for something like this if you know that this order does not go far enough? Why the photo op? Why the "we shall overcome" aura of this? And that's just because, again, they're playing on your emotions. They're playing with your mind. This is psychological warfare. Anytime they call all these people up for something that they're even admitting in the front end, this isn't going to do nothing. That lets you know that they're playing games with you. Does not directly affect local police departments. So that's a big thing we should understand. This executive order is for the federal police, not for the local police, not for your city's police, not for your county police, not for your state police. Federal police, who most of us don't really deal with, especially not to the level of local police. Now, it does not necessarily represent permanent change. The next administration could swiftly undo it. That's why I never understand when I hear people say, we need an executive order from Biden. Do you understand that if Biden loses, or even if someone else is in office next time, and it looks like it's probably going to be the case, probably, that person will just undo everything that was done in that previous executive order, and it's literally erased, like it never happened. Look at how Biden got in office and just undid everything that Trump did. That's how easy it is. So this is not a permanent change. It's literally something so long as there's someone who agrees with this in office. And even like there's been things that we've had that were more concrete than this. If you think about, for example, the Freedmen's Bureau, that was actually an institution that operated somewhat, right? And you had some laws that were backing it, and you had some Republican activists or abolitionists back in the Civil War who were backing it. You know what happened? A change in administration literally undid all of that, all of the institution building, all of that was undid that quickly. That's why I say, if you want to stay in America and believe in the federal government's going to be your help, you might want to study history and study politics a little more, because any type of change the federal government does can easily be undone. Now, here's the obvious gotcha. So Biden has had long-standing relationships with police and unions. He didn't want to be at odds with law enforcement when crime was a growing concern for the country, not to mention an issue ahead of this year's midterm election. That's why I said these drafts are leaked on purpose. A phrase about how this is crazy. A phrase inside of the executive order that said deadly force should be used as a last resort when there is no reasonable alternative had to be cut. So they leaked the draft, this phrase, a last resort. Deadly force should be only used as a last resort when there's no reasonable alternative. And they said, okay, well, we have to cut that out. Now, keep in mind, people were dragged or went willingly to the White House, people whose families were killed, murdered by the police for deadly force that was not warranted. Those same people stood by and watched them sign this, and there was not even a condemnation or action saying, hey, deadly force should not be used when it's not necessary. And yet these people are standing there while he signs this law. Please make it make sense to me. However, the executive order requires federal law enforcement officers to prioritize de-escalation and intervention, something that most of them already do have written down inside of their police manuals, if they ever see another officer using excessive force. A significant portion of the order is dedicated to collecting information, such as creating a database to track misconduct by federal officers and expanding tools for analyzing the use of force. As in executive orders, the policies are limited to federal agencies, but administration officials plan to attach strings to federal funding to persuade local departments to adopt similar rules. So this is the best they have to offer you. If you're talking about protection from the federal government, we know the DOJ doesn't protect. We know the FBI doesn't protect us. This is the best they have to offer you, a meaningless, toothless law. So I just want to say again, You have some alternatives or some things to think about. If you feel like as an African person, you have to stay in America, just understand, self-defense doesn't come easily. That requires a level of organization, and you can talk to other people who are already in militias about, what does that entail, or brainstorm things with people who are like-minded. And then you have this issue of political advocacy, which always falls flat when you're talking about the federal government. Understand what you're dealing with, understand the beast you're dealing with, understand how America is going to continue to treat our people. Nothing is new under the sun. We're dealing with this ongoingly. So let's just be aware upfront of what we're signing up to deal with whenever we're saying we're going to be inside of the United States of America. All right. Last story that we're going to talk about, and this is a story that I wanted to share again because I want us to not let this fall off of our radar when it comes to this Wagner group. I just wanted to use this is not even an article I'm reading from, but this particular photo I wanted to use because it's kind of like perfect to show how this Wagner group in Russia is being used to depict what's happening in Africa. Now, let me say on the front end, if you know anything about me, I'm not someone who takes the stance that, Russia's good in Africa. I don't take the stance that China's good in Africa. I take the stance that you have to look at things in a nuanced fashion, understanding that these are countries that are looking out for their self-interest. And our problem is that we want our own people to do the same thing. And any type of agreement that we get into with any foreign powers, we have to be doing so looking out for our self-interest. That's what has to happen when you're sovereign. Now, that being the case, so I'm not a pro-Russia, I'm not pro-China, I'm just not. But I certainly am aware that Western imperialism and Western colonialism is our number one threat as African people. So when you're talking about what do you put your first focus on, you put your first focus on the threat that we all face, being under attack by these Western imperialists, whether it's China, whether it's the United States, whether it's the UK, France, Germany. These people are in concert. They are together in their mutual appreciation for maintaining the colonization of African people. So when you understand that, whenever you get something from the Western imperialist that says, hey, don't pay attention to what we're doing. Those people over there, look at them. Look at what they're doing. They're going to hurt Africa. And they don't want to talk about their current, past, present, and future plans to similarly deal blows to Africa. And even in many times worse fashions, these types of blows to Africa. That's where you have to understand you're being used in political football. And that's when you don't participate. If we want to have conversations about China versus Russia in the West and Africa, you cannot let the West be the one that are leading the conversation. That's just asinine. You don't let your enemies tell you, okay, let's talk about what needs to happen. And let's talk about who's the worst one who's inside of the African continent. That's silly, right? And yet a lot of people fall for that. So that's what I want to just lay the foundation of as far as what this story we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the Wagner Group. I just wanted to read a little bit of this New York Times article because I want us to understand something I've been emphasizing for a while, that the way that they're talking about this Wagner Group in Russia, it sends a lot of red flags for proxy war. And if you understand that what's happening in Ukraine is a proxy war, you understand that they're looking to continue similar types of wars in the future. Now, the problem is that Africa did not take a hard stance against Ukraine overwhelmingly, or against Russia overwhelmingly. Africa overwhelmingly basically said, we're going to be neutral. Now, you had some people jump out there. You had that Kenyan ambassador jump out there and say that this is like colonialism, what Russia's doing. You had the president of Ghana jump out there. I don't think Kagame. Someone else jumped out there. You had some people that jumped out there coming against Russia, and then you had a lot of people who said we're going to be neutral. We had Ramaphosa in South Africa say, listen, We see what's going on. This ain't our fight. Let's focus on what's going on in Africa. Now, being neutral was deemed a threat because they don't want us to be independent minded. They don't want us to be sovereign. Like, that's what sovereignty is. You think about your own interests first. They don't want us to be like that. They want us to basically do what they want us, they tell us to do. So when they tell us, hey, you have to agree with us, they want us to say basically, yes, master. When they want us to jump, they want us to say how high. That's what they want from Africa. That's what they expect from Africa. But Africa took a different stance than what they expected. Because of that, you have a lot of foreign policy analysts, a lot of military personnel that are seeing a threat with the fact that Africa did not jump on board with their narrative of the Ukraine-Russia issue. Whatever you think about that, you should understand that African countries should have the right to take whatever stance that they want to take, right? That's like freedom. That's liberation, right? No, there's no liberation in international politics. The United Nations, NATO, IMF, all of these international bodies, G20, G50, G10, whatever, they're all about compliance with the global order. They're all about compliance with the US run world order. That's really what it's about. When you fall out of compliance with them, then you become suspect and could possibly become an enemy. Now, Africa is not yet an enemy, but I think that this type of article gives us a lot of the language that lets them know that that's where they're trying to go with it. So, by the way, if you want to, I want you to read this whole article. The whole article, links to those will be in my Telegram channel. The link to that will be posted below. It's always in the description. And I want you to add yourself to that because that's where I post things nowadays, because I just don't trust the mainstream outlets as far as like social media and stuff like that to actually adequately share information when I post it. For example, WCC, even our Twitter page apparently has had a lot of posts that we try to post and it gets taken down. So that's why we can't rely on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, especially because we already know that these same entities, I mean, I did a whole article on this. These same entities are literally controlled by our intelligence, So we know already CIA is running the backup clouds. All the information we're putting with these agencies are being logged. And it's not to say that when we go to other entities that is not the case, but it's to say that when you know something, let's try to act a little different. So that's why I post things to Telegram. It's a decentralized platform. You can add yourself to my Telegram channel in the link below. Okay, so let's read through this article. The article is Putin's shadow soldiers, how the Wagner Group is expanding in Africa. Best known for its mercenaries, the Wagner Group also mines diamonds, spreads disinformation, and props up autocrats in an effort to grow Russia's footprint. Mines diamonds, spreads disinformation, props up autocrats. Who has done that in Africa? Yeah, Western nations, right? Yeah, they have a lot of smoke for Russia doing it, right? Mercenaries are enjoying a resurgence in Africa, hired to fight in some of the continent's most intractable conflicts. Perhaps the most famous outfit is the Wagner Group, a nebulous network that combines military force with commercial and strategic interests, now at the vanguard of Russia's expanding ambitions in Africa. Wagner fighters have been active in the wars of Mali, Central African Republic, Mozambique, and Libya. They ally with embattled leaders, militia commanders who pay for their services in cash or with lucrative mining concessions for precious minerals like gold, diamonds, and uranium. Wagner troops have faced frequent accusations of torture, civilian killings, and other abuses. Again, this is horrible. If this is true, absolutely, get them out of here. But who else does this? We know who else does this. The Wagner Group is far more than simple guns for gold scheme. Operating through a spiraling web of shell companies, it has become a byword for a spectrum of Kremlin-backed operations in over a dozen African countries. Wagner meddles in politics, props up autocrats, orchestrates digital propaganda campaigns. It donates food to the poor, and produces action movies set in Africa. It has even organized a beauty pageant in Africa. Kremlin denies any link to Wagner, but America and European officials, as well as most experts, say it is an unofficial tool of Russian power, cheap and undeniable, a cheap and deniable way for Vladimir Putin to expand his reach, bolster his war chest against Western sanctions, and expand his influence on a continent where sympathy for Russia remains relatively high. So read the rest of the article, hear how bad the Wagner Group is, hear what they're saying, and understand that all of these things are being said for the purpose of convincing us as a people that we should overlook our struggle to first get rid of the West and focus on other powers who are enemies of the West. And that's what they want you to basically take away from this. More so, though, they want to start kind of like analyzing the Wagner Group in such a way that they would a terrorist group. You know, this is like the same type of thing that you would put out there about Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, like really getting inside of people's minds that the people are being harassed and they're being tortured and they're being, you know, all these things are happening. We have to go in and liberate them. That's the background, like, you know, sentiment. We have to liberate these people. And that's what's going to be pushed in the media, I think, if things keep on the path that is currently going on. So I just wanted to keep people to be aware of that and always keep this story in mind. The Wagner Group is not going anywhere. The Western push for infiltration, intervention inside of Africa, military intervention in Africa will only grow as we see this war taking a toll on international policies and the norms. So that's all I have. I can drink my water because I'm congested, but want to remind you all, and I'm going to play this ad. Hey, conversations like these, we can't just have them through YouTube. We have to have them amongst each other. That's why we're having a convention, Pan-African Unity or Perish, a call for the abolition of neocolonialism. This is AUMD, Africa Unity Movement for Decolonization, a number of African-led organizations, primarily based in Africa. We have WCC, obviously based in America primarily, but we also have Impedum based in America. We have a number of African organizations in Africa. We have the AAPRP. We have Movement for African Emancipation. We have the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. We have so many organizations, Friends of the Congo. We have over in Haiti, we have CASA. We have many organizations, and we want to grow and see more organizations also take on, you know, this issue. And so this is what we're trying to do, just to start a conversation. We know that a conference or a convention is not end colonialism in itself, but we know that not talking about these things amongst ourselves and analyzing them for ourselves is going to go forward with the complacency that they are used to. They want us to be complacent about neocolonialism. They want us to look at neocolonialism as if, oh, this is just business as usual. They don't want us to talk about, hey, how do we get out of this predicament? How do we strategize outside of it? This is why these types of conventions, conversations are needed. So it is a virtual conference. It's based in Zimbabwe. We started off talking about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is under sanction. Western imperialists are trying to destabilize this country because they dare to be sovereign. Based physically in Zimbabwe, but as far as us outside of Zimbabwe, we have the option of tuning in digitally. And you don't have to sit through the whole thing if you have something to do. Let's say you have to, you know, log into work for a part of the day. Okay, log in when you can and catch the conversations, you know, on the back end when you can. But definitely be a part of the live conversation, be a part of the in-person experience, and let's just have this conversation. A convention completely dedicated to neocolonialism. When's the last time you've seen something like this? We've seen things dedicated to capitalist interests. We've seen things dedicated to, you know, just culture. But have we seen something specifically dedicated to neocolonialism? Not a lot, or at least not that I've found. So this is our opportunity to devote a complete conversation, 3 days, to talking about neocolonialism, what we're going to do about it. So the link to that is down below. And guess what? Right now, I'm going to play an ad for you, just in case you need some more motivation after that long spiel I did. Okay, I love the music. So everyone, thank you for watching today, and I hope that you tune in. I believe I'll be back next week, as long as I don't get sick or anything like that. But God willing, I'll be back next week. Definitely check out Frank's talk this Friday. He's going to be talking about the New World Order, and also check us out on Saturday. We're going to be doing our 10 a.m. podcast and book club. Where we're going to go forward discussing liberation amongst ourselves, and also talk about some hot topics as well. So with that, everyone, thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next